Hi, everyone. It's Joe Veneri, the host of Fit Insider, the show where I talk with the entrepreneurs, executives, and investors who are redefining the business of fitness and wellness. Today, I'm joined by Anand Sharma. Anand is the founder and CEO of Gyroscope, an app that lets you track and improve everything about your health. In this episode, we talk about Gyroscope's evolution from a personal health experiment to a sustainable business, the challenges and opportunities in creating a personalized health dashboard, and the company's mission to build a new operating system for the human body. Let's get into it. A quick reminder before we get into today's show. Every Tuesday, we send a weekly newsletter filled with insights and analysis on the business of fitness and wellness. Join other decision makers and industry operators by subscribing at insider.fit.co. Let's get into it. Anand, welcome to Fit Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Really excited to chat today. And I think just to kick things off, can you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about Gyroscope, and then we'll get into it from there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Anand, founder of Gyroscope, and our mission is really to build a new operating system for the human body. And I can get more into why we do that and what that looks like. But originally started it as a personal dashboard for my own health. So it was just a personal website that I built 6 years ago on my blog. And that kind of one thing led to another and ended up making that into a service for other people to use called Gyroscope. And that's evolved a lot over the years, as has the whole health industry and what's possible since then. So I think if people have heard of it or used it over the past, there's kind of different snapshots of the evolution of the company. But the current thing we're focusing on is giving everyone access to a personal health coach. We realize that's super important. Everyone really needs this thing. And so there's two features we have. One is an automated version that's really affordable, and other ones with an actual human expert guiding you through everything. And so that's kind of what Gyroscope looks like.
Yeah, it's super exciting, and we'll look to kind of touch on all those pieces that you talked about. But, I kind of mentioned this to you offline when we were chatting. The company's been around since 2014, and it's, my involvement in the health and fitness industry, it's popped up on my radar a couple of times. It's certainly been really interesting to me in terms of the concept overall, but the design is really cool. The vibe is really interesting as well. But wasn't, always super aware of what actually is it? What is it doing? Where is it going? So in terms of, you kind of mentioned it starting as a way for you personally to track your health data. How did you get going, and what was that original vision versus kind of what it has now evolved into?
Yeah. So I think our high level vision has really sort of been the same of this goal of your body has an operating system, right? And it's kind of obsolete. And so it needs to be updated. And so that's kind of the goal. And I think how we are able to do that has changed a lot as new things come out. So it's interesting to look back at mock-ups from 5-6 years ago of things that seemed totally crazy, seeing my blood sugar and blood levels changing in real time and stress levels and stuff. And now that just being oh yeah, we launched that a year ago and it's there and it works. So big part of it's just been these technologies and stuff that now exist that earlier didn't or weren't available to a normal human at least. And so yeah, I think in a high level, we've kind of gone through 3 phases. The first few years were really just about the data tracking and working with sensors and a lot of this kind of infrastructure and plumbing, just to actually get the data in one place and think that, and a lot of tech and tracking and building our own trackers for things we didn't have, as well as integrating with other devices and sensors and things that were also coming on the market. So earlier on, that was a lot of the focus. And the original idea there was just having this data and dashboards is really powerful. And so that was what our focus was on. And then as we got more and more data, it kind of, the problem changed from at first it was oh, you don't have enough data, you need to have more data on the screen. And then eventually we're oh no, you have too much data now. No one knows what this means. And it's too much for a human to even review daily. And so then we started building more analytics around that. And especially with more human level coaching. So, I'm not a health expert. My background is more in software and design and stuff. So we built our own health and coaching team with nurses, trainers, nutritionists, et cetera, to actually really do it right and from first principles. So we started that in 2016, 2017 to really find insights and use this data to help people get to their health goals. And at that point, it was very theoretical, like whether that would work or not. We hoped it would, but it never really been done before. And so that kind of took up the last 2-3 years. And now we've, I think, mostly solved that and figured out what all this data means and how it fits together. And now we're kind of working on the problem of taking the stuff we've done at a small scale and like more manual coaching and making that more accessible to everyone. But at a high level, our goal, I think, like probably most of the other companies that are on here, is like really just to help people live healthier lives. I think our differentiator here is having like a balanced and wide breadth of data that really accurately represents what's going on in your life, and then building better tools, really trying to upgrade your operating system for how your body works and how you manage it, and give people better tools.
Yeah, and I think all that, it definitely fits in, and especially when you're looking at the website and then you're just like kind of zooming out and thinking about all the wearables and sensors and data that exist. And so kind of like jumping ahead to today, there's the Gyroscope Pro, Gyroscope AI, Gyroscope X. I think you've kind of talked about those, but can you just like conceptualize those in terms of like, what do they do? What is that experience like for the users? And then maybe how are you thinking about that as part of like the business plan as the company continues to evolve?
For sure. Yeah. And so one of the early things was not just figuring out the product, but also like a business model, since this is like very, intimate, important stuff. And so really putting everything on a subscription and having our only revenue be just from our users, and having that be very clean and clear, and like aligning our incentives. And so our main product is called Gyroscope X, and that's like our high-end, fully managed human coaching service. And so that kind of bridges all this data and syncing and tracking and wearables with actual humans and insights. And so that's kind of if you can afford it, and we've tried to keep it very affordable, but that's kind of, most people say that's like the best investment they've ever made. And it's potentially very life-changing to have like a full-time person who's in charge of keeping you healthy and focused on that. And most people aren't, doing that themselves. And so that's really the model experience we've tried to do, of like, if you have an unlimited budget and the best data, what's possible. So a lot of that comes around like nutrition, exercise, sleep, just balancing everything. And then we've basically, with Gyroscope AI, we launched that at the beginning of this year. The goal was, well, not everyone can afford the $150 a month, but we do think everyone should have access to this and be healthy and have these important tools. So how do we make a more automated, streamlined version, give away those insights at a lighter level, give people still access to a coach, maybe not a full-time coach, but one when they need it. And so that's kind of our new Gyroscope AI offering. And then Pro, we're actually kind of deprecating. That's what we launched 7 years ago. So it's still a pretty good product, but it sort of needs a refresh. So we're actually in the process of relaunching a very light, simple tracking only version called Gyroscope OS, which is like the OS for your body. And that's kind of what I think a lot of people think of as Gyroscope initially, which is like our places tracker and syncing data from various places so you can see the charts and graphs and stuff. And so we're planning to make that available at a really low price just to get everyone started and have access to that data. And then once you're ready for a coach or making improvements, or you want help to fix whether it's your body fat or sleep or stress, whatever issues there are or improvements you want to make, really having access to a person who can help you with that, powered by your data, and like actually doing it for you as a person and you're where you are now, rather than just kind of generic advice, which I think is kind of what's out there right now for the most part.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I want to get to in terms of the trajectory. There's a couple things I want to hit on in between, but just the idea that, it feels like a lot of the things that you're doing in kind of this end-to-end or kind of all-encompassing subscription is happening across the landscape in a more fragmented way, right? So there are things for glucose, there are things for tracking activity, there are things for tracking sleep, there are coaches who then, a human in the loop that now is doing some of that. There are some that are algorithms. So is it in your mind just that it was, maybe you guys were early to the game and were doing it in a way that maybe was ahead of the time, and now it's more well-timed with just where things are in terms of interest, technology as well? Or how do you think about all that evolving and kind of like where Gyroscope sits?
Yeah, I mean, our roadmap it wasn't, I think a lot of companies, they have a thing and now they want to get that to more people. We kind of came at it more from, I think, first principles of like, I didn't really have a strong opinion about like what was wrong with the human body or what we should do, but kind of been figuring that along the way using data and what we're finding. So ultimately, yeah, that's kind of defined like what our features are and how it works. It's just like, what will it take to really solve this problem correctly of like, people aren't healthy and they don't feel great and they're gaining weight and stuff. And so that's kind of unfortunately required a lot of features and tracking and tools and stuff. So, like nutrition, for example, is something we launched in X and we've been focused a lot for the last couple of years. And my original hope was like, by fixing more of these other things, I would not have to worry about like what I was eating necessarily. And I could just work out a lot more. And then, that would be fine. I think that's like a thing a lot of people aspire to, but kind of realize like, oh, that's actually not possible, right? So now we have to understand your food and do that. So, just how the body works and the need to find balance between all these things has basically been kind of one of the core principles, and that's defined just like what we've ended up building and how the app works and stuff. And I think the other thing is like all these things, you could probably do well for like a week when you focus on it, but that's not the challenge. The challenge is like doing it consistently for the rest of your life while also living your life and going to work and doing all these other things, right? So I think that's still an unsolved problem, and a big part of it's like really reducing the friction and having better tools and monitoring, and things will go wrong and you will fall off of things, and just having better reminders and tools to get back on and manage that. And so that's where a lot of things like the continuous monitoring and stuff come in handy. But yeah, I guess our vision is like all these things, and a lot of this has been done already in other industries. So I think we were early to it, but also not very original. Like I don't think much of what we're doing is super innovative. Like if you look at like how people run their businesses or how a car works or just like all these things, like they've already been done and invented for like, these high important things. And we're just basically taking all those best practices and bringing them to the human body where for some reason, like no one has done it yet, right? Whether it's like continuous monitoring or dashboards or coaching, all these things I think are really important tools.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off. I do think it's important, but that point around, we see this more broadly, that a lot of the innovation that is now coming to health and fitness more broadly, it's like, this has all been done. Like these are not new ideas across the board of like vertically integrating services, of tracking and using feedback to see how your body responds or sleep or, all these things. And, some folks that we talk to say, oh, it's just a matter of like, it's only been more recently that people are spending the types of money from a consumer perspective, rising healthcare costs they're now going towards this industry. And we're thinking about health and wellness and productivity now, which is like tipped into optimization, right? For some people. Do you have any sense of like why it is that it's taken longer for this to get to what is seemingly, the most important thing, which is like your personal well-being, and what we do to kind of accelerate that maybe?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, I think there's a lot of it's just the sensors and the technology and hardware being cheap enough and accessible, right? So 20 years ago, we'd have like iPhones or phones and things. So it would have probably just not really been possible. So I think there's just layers of things that made it possible to have what we have now. And then also, I mean, we started Gyroscope in like 2014. And I feel like that as there's more of an industry and precedent and stuff, and like someone's done it once, then it becomes a lot easier for other people to also kind of see how that works and continue that. So I think, it's interesting to see the whole industry being started. And now that people are thinking about their health and realize it is trackable and changeable, I think hopefully that will continue to accelerate. And, not just what we're doing, but all the other companies as well that are thinking about that and sharing these insights and tools and stuff. I think it's definitely an ecosystem, and especially in the early days, that was kind of important to us as well, of like not just trying to like own the whole space or like be one big super company that like is everything, rather than like working with other sensors and devices and companies that we also think are doing good stuff to kind of combine that experience into like one, actual really nice curated experience for the user. But it's definitely like a big collaboration, right, between lots of different companies providing different parts of the experience. And hopefully that adds up to people ultimately being healthy and happy and successful in their health.
Yeah, your perspective, I think, is refreshing, because on the flip side, what you see and hear is, and it's kind of a, you know, I've used the word before, I don't know, like on Twitter or something, the idea of like a health dashboard. And it rubs some people the wrong way. They're like, no, we don't need this. You shouldn't have your data, whether it's from a privacy perspective or who controls that data. You know, Apple's building this health OS system that they're trying to run everything through. And on the flip side, there's like electronic health records that healthcare has had trouble for years kind of getting to the place where it's like super effective, such that, you know, it actually equals any type of change in health behaviors. And there's the idea of like the health dashboard taking the wearables, the trackers, the technology that we're already using and just making it that much more actionable. Do you think it goes the way, I don't want to say winner take all, but you mentioned kind of like being the kind of not wanting to be someone who monopolizes the health data dashboard situation. Do you think it ends up going that way, or do you think it is more accessible and kind of open source?
I think there's probably a variety of ways it could go, but my thoughts on this are that like it's such a complex problem, and like, you know, I think right now it feels so small, and like there's where everyone's competing with each other. But I think it's kind of like restaurants, right? Like if there's one restaurant that does good food, that doesn't mean like other ones can't exist, and like going to one is probably going to make you more likely to also go to the other ones and stuff, rather than compete against that. So in the context of like human body and mind and like that, there's just so much room for improvement and fixing things and making people's lives better here. Like, you know, and so many other things that are like making it worse, right? Whether it's like unhealthy food or watching stuff on that, like there's almost every company is like a negative impact on your health that like, I think having like 5 companies that are improving your health is not going to like magically fix that. So I think there, you know, could be a lot more. I don't think there's going to be like a winner takes all where there's like one company that magically reverses 90% of other, you know, products and things like impacting your health. So yeah, I think there's always going to be room for people wanting to feel better, and it's like such a basic human need that like I think it's actually going to keep growing, and there's going to be a lot more room for that. That said, I do think there's a risk that like people just don't do it well and it's not solved right, and then the whole thing kind of just dies, or just like it doesn't solve the initial problem, and we have all these kind of half-baked solutions that don't actually solve human health. And so I think if it's like if people go through all the work and pay for these trackers and have dashboards, but then after a few years they realize like they're not actually any more healthy, then I think, you know, then it's the question of like, well, is that actually worth it or not? And so I think there's a risk that like we kind of do it and it costs a lot of money and time to set up all these trackers, but then people just get burnt out because it's not worth the effort. So and this quantified self movement's been around for a long, long time. And it's interesting. And it's like a very hobbyist niche thing that like very small percentage of people do. And I think one of the challenges with Gyroscope is like reducing that barrier to entry and effort. So it's really not like an impact on your life. Like we can't have people spending like 2 hours a day writing everything down in like Excel or something to track it, right? Like at that point, even if it had a positive impact, it wouldn't be worth the cost of time and effort to like track things, right? So I think that's kind of the extreme case, but like the question is, are these things and changes going to actually give people an improvement that's worth the cost? And I think for an average person, that's still unproven. And like most people don't, you know, track much of their life or care about that very much, or see that it's like going to solve their problems. And even though like I think sometimes it feels like we all use it, and it's within the industry, it seem like very obvious things of like, yeah, obviously you should have healthy glucose levels and your HRV should be high and stuff. But I think it's still not quite like a mainstream thing or something that like, you know, most humans agree on is like how you should live your life. So I think there's still lots of room for like good experiences and design and innovation here to like actually make this a mainstream behavior that like billions of people use.
Yeah, I think all of that whole we'll probably end up clipping it and replaying that, because it's easy to lose perspective when you're in it and deep in it, and a user of these things, working on a company that does these things. We've gotten to the place now where it's like we want to invest in companies in this space and working with these founders, and you think about how cool it is and how it can democratize access, right? You hear that, and get more people living a healthy lifestyle, and hopefully that technology makes it more attractive and it pulls people towards these healthier behaviors. But at the end of the day, it's like, we just need people to go for a walk. We need people not to eat food that is highly inflammatory or full of sugar. We need them to go to sleep on time and get more sleep. And it's like those things don't actually match up with a lot of the intricacies and technologies and that what we're tracking and doing. So I know, and it sounds like you go back and forth too with kind of like balancing this. I struggle to kind of stay like, somewhere in the middle, to be like, we just need to get more people healthier. We just need to get more people moving. We just need to get more people conscious and aware of these things. So is there, whether it's you personally or as you talk to the team or as you think about the features that you're working on, is there any framework or thought process, or is it you just try to keep it top of mind and kind of come back to that as you're working through these problems?
Well, yeah, I think there's a few ways that's evolved. I think one of our sort of product development workflows over the years has kind of been like me experimenting with things, or us as a team, trying stuff out and then kind of bringing that to more people, to like our testing it out with our ex members and like coaching them through it. And then as we see that works and validating it more and more, then making it more broad and accessible and part of the app experience. So that's in some ways often how these things kind of have trickled down, and kind of what was like cutting edge 5 years ago, where like I was just pricking my finger to check my glucose. Now we've kind of got accessible to a lot more people, for example, and that process takes a while. But yeah, I think the other thing that is really important, like we're kind of trying to stay very strategic about this, and at a high level, like the approach is like, this is an operating system, which I think that gets very misunderstood. And we kind of took that off from our homepage because it's very like technical idea. But I think it is important in terms of like the mission, which is essentially like, I think a good analogy is the iPhone. Obviously, it's quite different than the human body, but in similar in some ways in that like it's a quite complex system. And you have different layers of like the hardware component and then the software, right? And I think for most people, it's like the hardware is working fine. You have a heart and liver and stuff, and it's not broken. But the software on top of that, that's managing things, is like very obsolete. And the evolution of this is over, a course of millions of years, whereas things have changed really fast, right? So a big question here is like, how do we very quickly update this OS? And so, if you're taking the iPhone, like that came out 10 years ago or a little more, and that original one is like totally obsolete, right? It didn't even have apps, or it was so different and it's changed so quickly, and there's tons of vulnerabilities, and every month a new update comes out that keeps fixing it and updating things and enabling new features. And in the over only 10 years, like that's just created so much change in the world. And yet our bodies, we have like so little control over that. Like it's easier to change settings on your phone than like your body, and one of those is much more important. And so I think that's like terrifying to me, and more people should probably be worried about that and focused on that. So, our goal, if Gyroscope works properly, is to give you the same access and understanding over your body as you have over your phone or all the other things that you own and you're responsible for. But I think this one's more important in that, like, you can't just buy a new one next year when it breaks. But I think that's basically what we mean by like the operating system for your body. And so I think there's some stuff for like vulnerabilities or things that are obsolete or that have changed over the years, right? Like our response to food and what kind of food is around, or stress, and just all these things that used to be good features, but like now they're not so good, and we need to really update them. And this might, in 100 years, Gyroscope will probably look very different. But currently, the only way to really change your operating system is by like changing the color of like pixels on your phone, and then like shooting light into your eyes, which then sends signals to your brain, which then like does things, right? So it's a very lossy, weird way of kind of manipulating your body, but currently like the best way we have. And so, but I think, figuring out what is it that is going wrong, and like how do we update it, and like giving people the understanding and access to that. So I think like when it comes to health right now, everything is like very superstitious, and it's like there's sort of these things that we understand are probably good, whether it's like walking or eating salads or something, but nobody, or at least normal people, don't really understand why that is. But possibly no one does, I think, really at the end of the day, like how all these things really work together and why one thing affects another and what you should do with it. And I think that's the cause of a lot of these issues of like, until it's like very concrete and proven, it's really easy to just like ignore it. And so, and dashboards and stuff, I think are just a very early sort of clunky solution to that. But I think ultimately like that needs to be managed and fixed, and each person's responsible for their own body. So they should have like the full understanding and control over all these things. And I think like making that into more of a game or like something where you understand how it all fits together so then you can manage it is, I think, a lot more practical than just kind of like telling people what to do and like hoping they trust you, or kind of these like status quo like thing that people kind of know are good, like, oh, vegetables are good, but it's unclear why. So a lot of what we're doing now is really showing people the underlying systems and what are the actual like main data points or metrics and how it works, and then giving you control over those using these different tools. So that's been really exciting. I think that kind of changes the approach of how people look at it. And as it becomes less opaque and you have more actual data, then I think it's a lot less of these like sort of superstitions or ideas of health versus like actual concrete, like effective ways of managing it.
Yeah, and in so many ways, it's like very antiquated, and we're just guessing. We're making like the best judgment that we can with the information that we have, which, to your point, isn't always a ton. So we're trying to do our best. On the flip side, I think that lack of understanding or knowledge, or even being able to pinpoint something, kind of turns other people off, or just like kind of forget it and they go the opposite direction, right? But it is such a big problem in terms of like cracking this code around health and the operating system. One thing I initially meant to talk about up top was just thinking about how you've approached building this, at least in terms of like what's publicly available. You've raised a little more than $1 million, have been chipping away at this for years now. Have you been profitable? Are you continuing to fund the company that way? Are you thinking about raising additional money? Like, what goes into continuing to grow the company and sustaining that growth in a field that is, so expansive, becoming somewhat more competitive, and is a massive problem to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, when we started, we raised money from some great investors, and that was how we started building it. And since then, we've grown in our user base and really, and also focused a lot more on these paid subscriptions and being more sustainable. And so that's kind of also affected how we grow and what we focus on. But yeah, at this point, we're like pretty much break even. So we have, a lot of really great customers who just pay us every month for using Gyroscope. And that's basically what sustains the business and our server bills and team and stuff. And then occasionally we raise money to kind of keep growing and doing new initiatives and stuff. So we haven't done much fundraising in a while now, especially now that we're not like reliant on that. So that's been nice. But yeah, a lot of other companies in the space have obviously raised like tons of money. So potentially, that's something that we will do eventually to keep growing and stay competitive and also just continue to expand. But again, my approach here has been really like just on solving this problem. I think it's like, this is such a basic human need and no one has done it yet, of like, building the operating system for your body and really unlocking these things that like pretty much every human wants, which is like to be happy and feel great and have a healthy body fat. And so I think as we're able to actually provide that scalably, like that will just really grow really fast. And we're already starting to see that now with our Gyroscope X program, where we've been doing that quite consistently. So yeah, as a business, we've really been like 99% focused on like just building the best product and solving the problem thoroughly. And then kind of plan is like, now that we have that, then we'll raise more money and kind of focus on scaling the business. But I think it's it's easier, I think, to make money in this space than to like help people be more healthy. So I think it's very easy to just get distracted by that and then just start counting like your millions of dollars and raise more money and do that and kind of forget to solve the core issue in the first place, which is like most people aren't healthy. So yeah, hopefully as we scale up and do that, we'll also see the actual metrics of like obesity in the US and stuff start to actually go down as this reaches scale and more people and stuff. So I think to me, that's like as important or more than like just us making more money or growing as a company. I think that's like one of our, equally important OKRs, since that is like what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's well put. It's easier to make money in the space than it is to affect change. It's something that we talk about in terms of, you have things like the fitness industry, just on like the brick and mortar side, growing into a $35 billion industry, but obesity rates have never been higher. So it's like, what's happening? Clearly it's like misaligned. And you could go down the path, food and whatever else to do that. And so I just to kind of put a pin in that point, is that from the outside looking in, it could be perceived as like, oh, you guys are just trying to keep a low profile. You're working on a particular problem, but it sounds like it was a conscious decision. It's something you talk about with the team, like, hey, this is what we're doing. We need to stay super focused. We're not going to go this path of, trying to raise a huge funding round and a press release and all this marketing when like we haven't solved the underlying problem yet, or maybe not to the degree that you had hoped to in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a bit of that. I mean, we've raised enough to like keep going and do the, have the team and work on what we're trying to do, but also been pretty careful with like not raising too much and then just going out of business in a year because we didn't grow, 10x our growth in that time. And so, yeah, kind of focused a lot more on like the health aspect and doing that at a small scale first, where we like really get it right before focusing on like the whole VC model of like scaling up and hyper growth and stuff. But that's definitely like on the roadmap. And I think we're getting very close to that point now. It is, I think, slightly tricky where it's like you almost make more money when people are unhealthy. So, and especially as like the fitness industry in general. So I think that's something that's kind of been an issue now that we're trying to figure out, where like we have people sign up for X and then within a few months they like reach their goal weight and they're like super like healthiest they've ever been. And they're like, cool, I figured it out. And then they cancel them. We're like, no. So, I mean, it's a good problem to have, but we're almost like have been too effective in many cases. And so we're kind of figuring out a good solution for that. But that's kind of been one of our biggest issues right now that we're trying to figure out of like, well, if we fix the problem so quickly, then it's tricky to build a business around it. But yeah, I think, and it's a pretty small team. So I've been trying to also we're trying to stay focused and not kind of go back and forth between fundraising and hiring and stuff. So yeah, I think really staying super focused on this mission and making sure the product is working and everyone's health is improving every month is kind of taken up most of our time right now. But definitely, I think it's like once we've scaled that out a bit more, I think we'll continue expanding the company and possibly raise more money and stuff. But it's been really great to have like awesome customers, both for the app at like the basic level as well as on X, who are basically now our investors, and they're paying for us to help them directly and kind of sustain the company. So like not being reliant on that has been really powerful and kind of give us like the patience and time to like make sure we do it right.
Yeah. And I think as we get towards the end of the conversation here, just thinking about as you continue to pursue that mission, work towards, affecting change in a sustainable way, is there anything you're really excited about, whether it's from the company perspective, particular product or features you have coming up, or just maybe as you look at, we're still pretty early in the year, 2021 in general, like what gets you fired up?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things at a high level, like over the years, our focus has evolved a lot from just sort of more physical stuff, like, your steps and exercise, to a lot more going into the mind. And obviously stress and stuff like cortisol levels and things like that are a huge impact on your health as well, that I think we're just starting to understand. And so, yeah, we've been doing a lot more stuff around things like meditation and breath work and stuff. And I'm personally super into that. And so that's starting to become more of aspect in Gyroscope as well that we're starting to get out to more people. So I think that will continue to be, and especially, this past year with COVID, I think in the past they were like, oh, I'm not stressed, or my mood doesn't affect me. It's kind of stuff we've heard in the past. And I think at this point now, it's like literally 0 people like are in that situation. And I think everyone is realizing like how important these things are to manage and get right. And the tools to do that are, necessary for everyone. So we're kind of continuing to focus on that. So that's one thing I'm really excited about. The other thing that I think is really going to change this and how people think about their health and really cancel out a lot of like misinformation is like this new labs feature. So basically enabling everyone to like start to advance the science, both on themselves as well as like as a community of like, there's all these things that you hear out there like, oh, this is good, this is bad, this is a cool biohack, kind of for the first time letting you actually do experiments. So often what people ask for is like, oh, just take all my data and then like figure out the correlations and show me, which is like, as a science, like from a science perspective, that's like not how you do things, right? Like you need to actually have a more rigid experiment and like test it thoroughly, right? Rather than like, oh, these two look sort of similar, so then maybe they're related. And so we built this feature called experiments, which you can do in the labs. And so that basically uses all these metrics like HRV and basically all the stuff we're tracking as like a fitness function to see like what actual impact these changes have, both on like things like your mood and sort of these softer things, as well as like actual empirical things like your HRV and your blood oxygen levels and things like that. And so I think that will quickly take a lot of the mystery out of like whether things work or not, where you can actually see it and validate the stuff within a week, test it, and then now that's like a new habit or something you realize like, oh, that doesn't help me. And so people are just now starting to use that. And we're starting to get a lot of like awesome reviews every week as people kind of share their experiences. And so I think as more and more people start to use that, just the science of like what we understand about the human body and how these things work and affect each other is hopefully going to start to move a lot faster. So excited to share a lot more of that, make that more open to the community as well, and kind of continue to push the envelope there.
Yeah, and likewise, I think that's a good place to wrap up and just get you out of here on this. A lot to look forward to, lots of different things coming down in terms of like the product roadmap. Where can listeners learn more and check out Gyroscope?
Yeah, you can find the Gyroscope app in the App Store. Just search for Gyroscope, Gyroscope. And so we have a free version as well as the paid subscriptions, but you can start with just tracking your mood for free in the app. So I highly recommend trying that out. And then you can also follow me on Twitter at April0. Send me any questions or comments. Love to hear from you.
Awesome.
And thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you making time. Super excited to share this conversation. So thanks again for joining us.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. For more from Fit Insider, visit insider.fit.co and subscribe to our weekly newsletter for insights and analysis on the business of fitness and wellness. Then go ahead and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. See you next time.